Hello, everybody. Hello from my noisy household. Hi, come on in and join me. Today we're doing clue number 2 of the Mystery Medallion quilt. So just as we get started, you might hear him, the bird downstairs. He is not happy. We have people walking around our deck outside. We also have spontaneous noises from the driveway that's right down there with the skill saw and whatever kinds of saws they're using. We're having some boards on our decks replaced today. So it is noisy here. I apologize as we get started for any background noise that you're going to hear in today's video. Hi, everybody. It's so great to see you. Clue number 2. Y'all, I have had so much fun on Creative Crew, just scrolling through the page every day, looking at all of your pictures from clue number 1. Y'all are doing such a good job. I hope you're having fun. Today we're doing applique. And I'm going to show you several different ways to do the applique so you can choose your favorite technique for doing clue number 2, the applique part. And so today's video might be a little bit longer because I'm going to show you like 4 or 5 different ways to do the applique. Just to let you know, several other clues down the road have applique pieces. And so my preferred method is using raw edge applique, and that's the way that I'm going to go. In each one of the videos coming up, I'm not going to go through all the methods like I am today. You can refer back to this clue if you want to see all the different methods. And this isn't all of them, y'all. This is like 4 or 5 different ways, but there's more. So if you are extremely new to applique, you might want to come back on the replay and revisit, especially if you have to leave the live, and see which way works for you. You might want to try a couple different ways to see which one works best for you. Hello, everybody. It's so great to see you. Oh, I need to slow down. I get so amped to get started. I'm going to switch you over to the cutting mat. We're going to take a look at clue number 2. This is found in the description box down below, okay? So what you'll see is you'll see clue number 2, the download link. If you're watching and this series is over, that link is going to bring you over to my Etsy shop. Right now, this pattern is free, okay? So this is a 3-page download for this clue. And you'll also see a link for the SVG file. If you have a cutting machine and you want to cut out your pieces really quick, you might think about purchasing the cut file. If you're watching this sometime after this quilt series is done, the SVG is included in the quilt pattern purchase, okay? Hello. Sheila says, you're killing me with the applique so soon, but I'm going to try and have an open mind. Sheila, you can do this. Come on. You've got this. The tooth is healing up. Still really sore, both top and bottom. But I'm much, much better, Miss Hazel. Thank you. All right, so let's just go over the pieces that you need to cut for this week, okay? From the A fabric. A fabric. We're going to be cutting 32 3.5 by 3.5 inch pieces. Now, if you have a rotary cutter and a ruler and a mat, it's probably a lot faster just to use those tools to cut out these pieces. But if you are extremely new and you don't have all of the gadgets for cutting your pieces, you could cut this out directly on the line. You need this template to measure exactly 3.5 by 3.5, and you could use this as your template to cut out your pieces, right? All of your A fabric pieces should measure exactly 3.5 by 3.5. And then you're going to need 32 of either your raw edge or your turned edge applique pieces that we are putting in the middle. All right, so because I think last week it was so helpful, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to walk you through, because we have so many really new quilters following along. And I don't know that we're going to do this every single week, but this is only week 2. So I'm going to show you, if you're intimidated to cut into your yardage, I'm going to show you how many strips to cut if you're using a rotary cutter and a ruler, right, for your pieces. Okay, let's do that. Let's start there today. And if you're watching on the replay and you're like, oh, I know how to cut out my pieces, you can just fast forward through this bit. All right, I'm going to share my screen. It's going to look really crazy for a minute. And we're going to go to the desktop. And I'm going to open this up. And I'm just going to give it a minute so that I know it comes up on the screen. Ooh, I'm chilly today. I saw lots of y'all are getting snow. It's sunny here. All right, it's on the screen. So we're going to start with the A pieces, right? I have the A fabric laid out here on my mat. If you want to cut 32 of these pieces for this clue, what I did was I cut 4 strips right off of the yardage. These 4 strips were 3.5 inches wide, right? So cut yourself off 4 strips. Then rotate them around and line them back up to a line on your mat, right? And then we're going to cut again in 3.5 inch squares right across your rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You should get 6 segments from 1 strip, okay? So doing the math, because remember this fabric is 42 inches wide and it's folded in half, right? So each one of those squares represents 2, not just the one you see on top. So if you cut them out like this, you're actually going to have 48 3.5 by 3.5 inch squares. That's okay. I want you to save the 16 you have left over. You're going to use them in another clue. So just put them in a Ziploc bag, put them in your box, and save those. Don't use them for anything. It's going to save you a little bit of cutting on another clue. Pull out 32 of them, and that's what you're using for clue number 2. Now at the bottom of the page, y'all, there's another yellow box. Okay, I want you to look at the yellow box on the bottom of the first page, and it says, as part of clue 2, cut 4 strips from fabric C that are 1.5 inches wide. Okay, so that's what you see here on the screen. There are my 4 strips that are 1.5 inches wide. You're going to put those in a Ziploc bag and you're going to put them in your box and save them for later down the road. And then from fabric C, again, we're cutting pieces for the applique portion of this block, right? So what I did was I cut 3 strips. Now you only see one here on the screen, right? But if you arrange your little templates like this, sort of diagonal a little bit, they fit on a 4-inch strip. And I cut 3 strips that were 4 inches wide. And that's the fabric I was going to use for my applique portion. Now I used a scan and cut, okay? So my fabric cutting was a little bit different. And what I did, if you're going to use a scan and cut or any cutting machine that has like a 12-inch mat, don't cut 4 strips like this, okay? Instead, I cut 2 squares that were 12 inches wide and then a smidgen of the leftover fabric from that, right? And I cut my heat and bond at 12 inches wide and I fused it to the back side. And using the SVG file, I duplicated it on my mat 15 times. I sent that to my cutting machine and it cut out all of my applique pieces in about 4.5 minutes. Because I did it twice. And then that was 30. I had to cut 2 more on a smaller little scrap piece of fabric, right? So that saved me a lot of time and it cut them out perfectly. So if you have a cutting machine and you're thinking about using it for your applique, that might give you some ideas. All right. Now let's go back. Where were we? Okay. Hi, everybody. I think I have a little fuzzy in my eye or something. There we go. Heather said, man, oh man, I want to scan a cut. I'm going to tell you what, Heather, that's my preferred way to do raw edge applique, is just send it right over there and it just cuts it. And with my shaky hand, you know, cutting perfect applique pieces is not so easy for me. So that makes it a lot easier. Laura, you could scan this PDF, right? If you have a scan and cut, and just take away the top raw edge template and then duplicate that in your machine. You could do that, absolutely. Okay, so I mentioned I was going to do several different methods of applique today. So we're going to start with the turned edge applique. So what you'll see, let's see, that's the first page. The second page, I've set it up so that you can actually print on freezer paper or heat and bond light if you want, right? You don't have to trace. If you have access to a printer, then you could print off, oops, then you could print off this page, right? This is page number 2. These are your raw edge applique templates. So yeah, you could print this right on freezer paper or heat and bond light. All you have to do is cut your sheets to 8.5 by 11 and put them through your printer. If you only have a laser printer, you don't want to do that, okay? And then if you want to do turned edge applique, I've done the same thing for you with those templates, although you don't need this many really, and I'm going to show you that here in a minute. But you could print this on freezer paper as well to make your templates for turned edge applique. So I did give you some printing sheets to help save you if you have a printer. I know some of you don't, but that might save you some time tracing this week because you need 32 of them. So the first way I'm going to show you, and let me just clear off this stuff, is turned edge applique using starch. Sorry, I have a bunch of notes today because I don't want to forget anything. Using starch, right? So I have the spray starch in a can. I have just a cheapy old paintbrush, a little cup to spray some starch in. And let's bring this over. What I have here, and I did link these down in the description box, and y'all might have seen me use these before. Recently, I got the freezer paper sheets that are already cut to 8.5 by 11, and they lay flat in your printer when you print on them, right? So what I did is I printed on one sheet, right? This is freezer paper. It's got the shiny side on the back. And then I have another sheet of freezer paper, and I'm just going to show you how to prep these templates real quick. I'm going to lay one sheet of freezer paper with the shiny side up. And then the printed side, the shiny side is going to go down. The printed side is going to stay up. And I'm going to fuse these together and make a pretty sturdy size template, right? It's going to take a second for my iron to warm up. Thank you for my moderators today. Thank you so much. It's going to just take a second for my iron to heat up. She's been asleep for a little bit. I appreciate your hanging out, even if you're not making this quilt. It's great that you're hanging out with everybody. It's going to just take a second. Let's see if it's warm enough. I'm going to just fuse these two sheets together. And that's just going to create a little bit of a more sturdy template that we can use, right? You could even layer a third sheet on here if you want it to be super duper stiff, right? I think 2 sheets is good though. And what it does is that actually bonds the 2 sheets together. So you would let this cool off, right? So what I'm going to do with these 2 templates, and I've already done this so you don't have to wait for me to do it, is on one of them, I cut out just the center portion, right? You need that. So cut one of these out right on that center line. And then on the other one, cut it out on the outside line. You can do that. You can have multiple templates going on at the same time, right? Or you could just use these 2 and you don't need those. I gave you multiples in case you want to do sort of like a chain pressing, right? But you absolutely don't have to do that. So your turned edge applique. Let me get some of this starch sprayed in this cup. Sheila, in a laser printer uses heat to actually bond the toner to the paper. So I would not put freezer paper through my printer if it was a laser printer. It might get stuck inside your printer. An inkjet printer uses no heat in the printing process, so it's safe to print on freezer paper or heat and bond. All right, I just sprayed a little bit of starch in my cup, right? We're going to let that sit because it's kind of foamy. The foam will go away and leave a liquid of starch, right? So let me pull over one of my strips of fabric, right? This is, remember when I talked about cutting 3 strips of 4-inch fabric? This is one of the strips. And what I'm going to do is get my rotary cutter. You could trace this with a pen and cut with scissors, right, if you're not comfortable doing this. But I'm going to use my rotary cutter. And the first thing we're doing is using the larger template to pre-cut our fabric piece, right? You should get several of those from one strip of fabric, and you'll use about 3 strips. But see, that goes by pretty fast, right? There we go. So you would finish cutting out all of your pieces just like that. And then you're going to center the smaller one right inside there. You know what I didn't bring over is a little stylus. Hold on a second. There we go. I have a couple of different little tools I like to do or to use when I'm doing turned edge applique, right? This little stylus came from the Dollar Tree. It's got a great little sharp pointy. And this is my old trusty wood stylus, right? But you might want to use something to hold this fabric over while you're pressing, because you are going to be using an iron to dry the starch. Cheryl says, I've lost the video. Am I still streaming? Can y'all still see me? She has no sound. All right, before we move on, I want to make sure we're good. Can y'all hear me? Can you see me? Oh no, what did I do? There we go. Okay, I'm here. All right. So what I'm going to do is take my little paintbrush, right? And all that foam went away and it's just left a little spray starch in my cup. So I'm going to wet the brush generously and I'm going to wet this little bit of fabric that sticks over that paper template, right? We're just going to wet it just like that. And then I'm just going to use my little stylus and hold that over. And we're going to start drying that starch with our iron. Now, had I really thought about it in advance, I would have probably brought over one of my smaller little irons because I feel like I have better control of the smaller little irons, right? But you're just going to pull over that fabric right onto that paper template, right snug to the edge, so it gives you a nice even curve all the way around. And as you go, you're just going to be drying that starch. So you can see it starts to lay down nice and flat, right? Can you hear my bird? So I just pull over little bits at a time and press. He is really mad. See that? Little bits at a time, right snug to that paper template. What that's going to do is give you a nice finished edge on your applique that's not going to fray or ravel if you ever wash this quilt, right? We're going to flip that over and we're going to wet the next side. So while this method is a little time consuming, it is gorgeous finished in your quilt, right? So we're going to wet that side and we're going to repeat the process all the way down. I like to get this little corner started first, a little tip. And then just hold that in place and start drying with my iron. I know my iron is probably in the way of you seeing, but I'm just pulling as we go along, just like that. See how the stylus is actually touching the fabric, not my finger, so I don't have to worry about it, my finger touching the iron. Let me heat that back up for a second. We still have this little bottom tip to do. All right, so you're going to have a little bit of thickness at both of your tips, and that's okay. And there we go, right? Both edges turned completely. Just like that. So what I like to do with the little thickness on these tabs, see if you turn it over and it might be fuzzy. See that little extra bit right there? You can just push that under, just like that, so that it's hidden underneath of your piece, right? Or you could take a pair of scissors and reach up under it and trim that away like that. See that? You could do either way. I usually just take a pair of scissors and trim it. There we go. So once it's cooled off, the starch is going to keep your edges turned over and you can reach right in and pull out this paper template and repress your piece, and you have a perfect piece of turned edge applique. Jackie said, do you do a blanket stitch with turned edge applique? You have so many options with the turned edge applique. I would do a blanket stitch, But you could come in and do a straight stitch just right on the inside, right? Because those edges are turned. You want to be close to the edge, but you could just do a straight stitch like that. You could do a zigzag stitch. You could do a decorative stitch. You could do a satin stitch. And what I'll say as we get started before we ever go to the sewing machine, if you choose to do a satin stitch with these pieces, turned edge or raw edge applique, I highly recommend using some sort of stabilizer on the back side of the block when you're sewing. That's going to help keep any puckering, tucks, things like that in your background. You want everything to lay nice and flat. All right, so there is the finished edge piece. And what I'm going to do is just bring in a block. And I'm going to add a little bit of glue. Pardon my messy glue stick, y'all. Just a little bit of glue here and there. Today I'm using an Elmer's school glue stick. Just a little bit. And we're going to center that on the diagonal on our 3.5 by 3.5 inch piece. One thing to keep in mind is that you will have seam allowances, a 1/4 inch seam allowance on all sides, right? So you want to make sure that this is centered as close as you can. You might even want to use a ruler and check it so that you don't cut off the little tips of your pieces right when you join these blocks. Once it's centered, we can just dry that glue. So that one is ready to sew, right? There's your first way to do the turned edge applique. We'll sew all these here in a minute so we're not switching back and forth, right? The second way I wanted to show you to do turned edge applique, we're going to use a fusible like, well, this is what I have on hand. This is a Medallion P44F. This is what I use in my t-shirt quilts, y'all. And I have bolts of it. So, yeah, this is what I'm using. It has the bumpy adhesive on one side. The other side is smooth. That's what we're going to use for this next method. So what I'm going to do from this 4-inch piece, I'm just going to cut myself off a piece of this like that and like that. So for this one, we're going to use the inside template. This is still the freezer paper template, right, that we just used. You're going to be using this one. And what we're going to do, where's my scissors? I want to cut this a little bit so you can see better. I'm going to cut myself off a piece of this interfacing so that you can see a lot easier. So for this method, I'm going to lay my fabric with the right side facing up, and I'm going to put the bumpy side of my interfacing facing the right side of my fabric, just like that. And then I'm going to put this on top, just like that. Now we are going to bring this over to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew right along the edge of this template, right? So let's move over there real quick. Let me move this camera just a little bit. There we go. Trying to make it a little bit brighter for you. There we go. All right, so I'm going to choose a straight stitch. And for my stitch length, I'm going to choose about a 2.2 for my stitch length, right? So I like to usually start along the side. I personally don't usually start at the tips of any of my applique, and that's just me. But I'm going to lower the needle right next to my template. And I'm just holding that template in place with my fingers, right? And we're going to sew right along the edge all the way around. Carefully, without moving that template, I'm going to rotate everything around. You could pin that template in place if you felt like you were going to struggle keeping that where it's supposed to stay. You could pin that in place. So right here is where we started. I'm just going to pass where we started just to lock everything in place, right? So what we have is our perfect shape for our applique. We're going to come back here to the cutting mat, and I left my scissors all the way at the long arm. Let's see if these scissors will work. We're going to trim away Did I lose y'all? Hold on a second. Did I lose y'all? My phone's been acting up today. Alright, so there we are. We're going to trim away all this extra, and we're going to leave a small, like, I like to do a little bit less than 1/4 of an inch seam allowance beyond our stitch line, right? You could use some pinking shears for this if you wanted to. I don't know why my phone just exited out of the video. I think YouTube is changing some stuff around. I don't know if y'all noticed, you used to be able to click on top live chat, or it gave you some options, like the options are gone on my phone today. I don't know why. Alright, so there's that side and there's that side, and we're going to carefully lift up and separate the two pieces, right? This is probably the part I struggle with the most. We don't want to cut into both of them, but we want to pull them apart just like that, right? We're going to cut a very small slit into our interfacing right in the middle, and we're going to turn this piece right side out. And you know what I'm going to do to help give me prettier points? I'm going to cut just the tips of this fabric off, being really careful not to cut my stitch line, right? And then we're going to turn this right side out. And I have to be careful because the Medallion in its nature is just very lightweight, right? But that means it does tear pretty easily before it's fused to anything. So I'm just being careful. I don't want my opening to extend all the way to the edge. This is part I struggle with, y'all. Turning stuff. Pam, you'll be able to get clue number 2 Well, it's free until the end of this series, right? There's 15 clues. But even after the end of this series, you'll still be able to download everything. It'll just be a paid pattern at that point. But yeah, you'll be able to download it for free as long as we're in this series. All right, Lisa, focus. Might be off camera here for a second while I turn this thing. I'm just trying to be really careful because I don't want to rip my Medallion. I do think there's different kinds of interfacing, fusible interfacing that are better to use than Medallion P44F. I just have a hard time spending money on something extra when I have bolts of this already here. Maybe the 911, Medallion 911, maybe that would be more sturdy and not tear so easily. But if you're careful, the 44F works too. You just got to be a little bit more careful with it. So there we are. I have finally got it turned, right? So that's the right side. And we're going to bring in our square. So at this point, you should, on the back, you should be able to feel the bumpy side sticking out. That's the adhesive. And that's what we're going to use to fuse this piece onto our background. I like to kind of just burnish those seams. We don't want to use any heat yet. Just kind of burnish those seams with my fingernail and work them down like that. And then you can center that right in place and fuse that. So that's the second way that I have done turned edge applique using a fusible. All right, so now that is fused in place and ready to sew down. I do think I am much better and cleaner at doing the first method versus the second, but I like to give you options because you might like this way better, right? So both of these have turned edge. That means they're not going to fray whenever you wash the quilt, right? They'll stay nice and clean and pretty. All right, so that's two methods of turned edge applique. Second, raw edge applique using freezer paper. Now, many of you found my videos because I've done many videos on applique using freezer paper, right? Raw edge applique using freezer paper. So what I did is I put another sheet of freezer paper in the printer and I printed off the raw edge applique templates, right? So here's my templates and I can separate these. I'm just going to do one with you. I'm going to cut one of these templates out, but not on the line just yet, right? Just like that. And you can reuse these templates with the freezer paper over and over if you like. I personally like having the line to cut through. So I would print off like 4 pages if I was using the freezer paper for my applique. I would print off 4 pages and cut on the line, but you can print off 1 page and use the templates over and over if you want. So the way I like to do this is I'm going to, let me make this a little bit smaller. I don't know if I cut that fabric big enough. I like to fuse mine. Let me cut it a little bit smaller. There we go. To the right side of the fabric. just like that, right? So here's the shiny side of the freezer paper. The line is on the dull side. Your fabric with the right side facing up. And we're just going to fuse that right onto our fabric. Sue said, up until now, I prefer the starch method. I do too. Out of those two methods, Sue, I do too. I get much cleaner results that way. All right, so the template will stick to your fabric, right? We're going to let that cool off for a second. And now we can cut our template out directly on the line. So I'll just go and take a second to do that. These scissors have a sweet spot on them that cut really nice and sharp, and then once you get past that sweet spot, they're not so sharp. There we go. So here is our raw edge piece for our next piece of applique, right? Let me bring in one of these squares. Let me bring in a piece of paper. Because at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some glue. Now, a lot of the times I'll use Elmer's School Glue, the wet glue, and just put a few dots on there. Today, I'm just going to use the glue stick. And I'm going to go right along the edge with just a quick swipe of glue, right? It's not super thick on there. And we're going to dry this with our iron so we won't be sewing through any wet glue. And we're going to center that right onto our square. I like to just rub it in place, and then we're going to dry that with our iron. So while we're drying the glue and setting that piece onto our background, with raw edge applique, chances are that the edges are going to fray if you ever wash this quilt, right? Now there are stitches in your sewing machine that you can use that prevent a lot of fraying. If you use the raw edge technique like I'm showing you right now, chances are your applique is going to fray a lot easier than if you're using a heat and bond product or steam-a-seam like I'm going to show you next, right? Because that kind of adds a little bit of like fray check on the back, right? It does help prevent fraying a little bit when you use the products like I'm going to show you next. Right now, all we have is Elmer's glue on the back of this applique fabric. When we wash the quilt, that glue is going to wash away, right? So if you're using this technique, you probably want to use a stitch to stitch down your applique that prevents fraying, like a closer zigzag stitch, right? That would help prevent the fraying quite a bit. We're going to let this cool off for a second. Peg said, what size is your small ruler? My small ruler. This one? This is a 12-inch. This was the Omnigrid 12-inch ruler. I'm not sure if that's the one you're asking, though. So once it's cooled off, we're just going to bend this paper back and lift it right off. And there is our applique fused to our background. It's still really bendy and light, right? And that is ready to be sewn down in place. Now, one of the reasons why I love this so much is because I do prefer a softer, more snuggly quilt. And so using freezer paper to do your applique is going to leave your quilt a lot softer. Right now, it has the glue behind the fabric, but once you wash it, that's gone, and this is even more softer, right? Versus your fusibles like Heat and Bond Light or Steam-a-Seam. Those, even though they do get softer as you wash them, they're still always there, right? This stays super, super soft. All right, so we're going to set that one aside. And then I'm going to show you Heat and Bond Light, which is my most favorite way. Right? And so what I did for this is I cut a sheet of Heat and Bond Light, 8.5 by 11. In the description box, I've actually linked a product, Heat and Bond sheets that's already cut heat by 8.5 by 11, right? And I just fed this right through my printer as well. Remember, I have an inkjet printer, not a laser printer. And printed out my templates this way. And this time, I'm going to separate my piece like so. We're not cutting it out on the line just yet. Just around it like that. And I'm going to cut off another little section of fabric. Try not to waste as little as possible. And this time, we're not fusing this to the right side. We're going to turn the right side facing down, and we are fusing this template to the back side. And that only just takes a second. And we're going to let that cool off. And now we can cut that out directly on the line too, right? These are easy shapes to cut if you are tracing and not printing, right? They're easy pieces this week to trace and to cut. Pretty simple. So there's our piece. And let me grab, that bird is going nuts today. Once this is cooled off, you can remove the paper backing. And your adhesive should be on your fabric, right? It's nice and shiny. And then you're going to line that up and fuse it right in place. You don't want to overpress, right? Because we've learned you can overpress the adhesive and then it just sort of soaks into your fabric and you'll find that your applique lifts or comes off completely while you're sewing, right? So don't overpress it and make sure your iron's not too hot for whatever kind of fusible you're using, right? All of them have pressing instructions that come with them. Just make sure you don't overpress, right? So that is our fusible. So what I did is, look at this, y'all. I already cut my 32 with the scan and cut, and it took about 4.5 minutes. So I just put them in my little baggie until I can get to them, right? So I have all of my backgrounds cut. I've even started sewing some. See that? And here's my finished pieces. I have that much left to do, right? And so I have them all pre-cut and ready to sit down and sew. Let's see, I want to make sure I'm not forgetting anything before we move to the sewing machine. So what I'm bringing to the sewing machine is, here's my Heat and Bond Light. Here's my freezer paper. Both of those are raw edge applique. Then I have my turned edge applique with the interfacing on the back side. And then I have my turned edge applique that we used the starch method with. So let's bring all of these over to the sewing machine. All right. So let's see. Let's do the turn to edge applique first, right? Because I feel like you have so many different options with this one. My favorite would be a blanket stitch, right? And so let's use a blanket stitch on this one. And do I have any testing fabrics here? Hold on a second. Y'all know I like to test my stitch before I actually start stitching down anything, right? I'm just going to bring in a scrap and we're going to see what this blanket stitch looks like. What I do have is some thread in both the bobbin and the top that matches pretty closely to my applique fabric. So it's going to kind of just blend in. You could do a contrasting thread though. I think that would be gorgeous. All right, so my blanket stitch, I'm just going to tell you my settings. And if you're looking, you know, you're sitting at your machine and you're wondering where do I start. My blanket stitch is set at a 2.4 for the width and a 2.4 for the length, and you can test that on some scraps and see what you think. I'm going to start sewing right along the side edge, and we're going to go all the way around with the blanket stitch. You might want to slow down when you come to the tips of these pieces, right? We're right close to the edge of these blocks. And so I just kind of slow down and take my time as I ease around that little tip. Right here is where we started, and that thread's just blending right in there. I know it's hard to see that stitch. And then there is my blanket stitch. The lighting is horrible. Oh, there we go. Do you see that better? So that is the blanket stitch and how it would look. Now, that could be a little time consuming, especially with 32 pieces to do, right? I feel like the blanket stitch, even though it's really gorgeous, and it's one of my favorites, it's a little bit more time consuming. The thread I'm using, I got some Coats and Clark because I had packed away all my thread in a box. So I went to Joann's and I got some Coats and Clark. I think it's an all-purpose thread. It was the only one that really matched my sea fabric color. So that's what I'm using. I don't know that I love this thread though. I'm just going to let you know. It's a little bit on the stiffer side. It's more stiff than what I'm used to using. It almost feels like it has a wax on it, but it doesn't. but it blends in with my sea fabric. So that's what I'm using because I've packed all my other thread away. All right, so this one is the one with the pellon on the back. I'm gonna see if I can't make this a little bit brighter. There we go. Goodness. If you want a really quick way to sew these down, I'm just gonna choose a straight stitch, right? And we're gonna go just right along the inside of this applique with a straight stitch. My stitch length is set at 2.4. And I like to trim this little starting thread right there. You could thread that and pull it back to the back side and tie it off in a knot if you want to. I did not do a back starch when I started, and right here is where I started. So I'm going to pass that and come down to about right here and then use my thread cutter. And that'll tie a knot on the back for me, right? It might tie a messy knot on the back, but you're not going to see that, right? All right, so a simple straight stitch all the way around. And again, this is turned edge, so the edges are not going to fray. And I think if you picked a contrasting thread for this, and that would show up really pretty. Or you could blend the thread color like I did, and it's just kind of disguised in there, right? But that is a great way to sew down your turned edge applique. All right, so we have those two. I'm going to bring in my raw edge applique pieces. This is the one. It's a little bit flimsier than this one. See that? This one is the freezer paper, and this one's the heat and bond. Just see that? I would show you a satin stitch, but I didn't bring over in any interfacing or stabilizer. And I really feel like if you use a satin stitch for your applique, you should have some kind of stabilizer, like a tearaway, a cutaway, maybe even 2 layers to help keep this from drawing up and puckering. I'm just going to choose the same, I don't know where my note went, the same little zigzag stitch that I'm using on my pieces for both of these, okay? So I'm going to choose a zigzag stitch. And I don't have my note here with me that tells me my settings. I did write them down, so let's just experiment. I think that looks good. So for my zigzag stitch, see how little that is? It's not really close together where it might draw up that fabric. It might draw it up more on the freezer paper method versus the heat and bond, because that has the heat and bond in it, right? But the settings I'm going to use for my zigzag stitch, the width is 2.2 and the length is 0.8, right? So we're just going to get started on the raw edge applique. am sewing with a really small needle today because I'm out of needles. This is not my preferred needle size, but it's working today. This is the 70. And I don't even have that package. I've packed everything up, y'all. Almost everything. It's this, in a multi-pack, it's the 70-12. I think that's what it is. It's the smallest one. I prefer an 80-12, but this seems to be working pretty good. So there we go. That is the zigzag stitch. You can see it much better on the back, right? And that's the freezer paper. And then I'll stitch out this one with you too. This is the Heat and Bond Light version. This one here will actually be the one out of all of today's versions that is going into my quilt. Oh, I went a little bit far. I'm going to raise that needle just a little bit. There we go. See how I just really slow down when I come to these tips. There's not much fabric there, right? I do feel like the other option would be if you were uncomfortable sewing it at an exact size, or when you sew the applique to the background, your background shrinks up because of maybe your thread tension or anything like that. I feel like you could cut your background square bigger than 3.5 by 3.5. And then you could fuse your piece in place and stitch it, and then square up this piece to 3.5 by 3.5. That is always an option if you were struggling with this piece at all, right? I always feel like we have options. Okay, so here's my 4 pieces that I've made today. See that? Isn't that pretty? Ooh. Just letting you know, that looks really pretty. But don't be tempted to sew them together. Don't do it. It looks pretty though, right? So let's see which one that is. This is the Heat and Bond Light. This is the one that's actually going into my quilt, and I sewed it here with y'all today. These are my examples. I feel like there's so many different stitches in your machine that will work. You're not limited to what I've shown you today. I'm just throwing some examples and letting you see how they would work. But don't feel limited by what I've done today. I even say if you love hand stitching, these turned edge appliques would be great with a hand stitched blanket stitch. They really would if you have some time on your hands. But there we go. There's that. And so right now, I'm up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have 5 of my 32 done. I have a lot more sewing to do. Okay, let me back up and see. Let's see. Laura says it seems like it would be a great way to relax. Yes. Gloria says, I like the small zigzag stitch. Yes, coffee filters work really great as a stabilizer. If you want to do a tighter stitch than what I've done today, right? Like any tighter of a zigzag stitch than this, or if you want to use a satin stitch, I would probably throw some coffee filters under the back side, right? And they just rip off easily when you're done. Donna said, how's the house hunting going? Guess what, Donna? We have a contract on a house. We go tomorrow for our home inspection. This week has been crazy. We have a ratified contract on our next house. This house, our current house, goes on the market in 2 weeks. That's why we have people replacing some boards on the deck that were bad, right? We want to get those done. They're also going to be painting some trim around some windows for us today. And our house goes on the market in 2 weeks. If you know anybody buying a house in the Williamsburg, Virginia area, let them know. Our house is pretty. But yeah, so we go for our home inspection on our new house tomorrow morning. Are you going to use the mini zigzag on all the applique on this quilt? I'm tempted to, but I might change it up. I don't want to commit yet, because I might change that up. I know that for all of these pieces, I will use the same tiny little zigzag stitch so that they all look the same. I cannot guarantee that I won't switch up on any other applique pieces that we might do down the road. I did. I designed this quilt pattern. Y'all, this is like an orange peel. I did not come up with this. This has been around forever, right? An orange peel. I didn't design that, but this element within this quilt, I designed the quilt layout. Kim said, what size was I supposed to cut last week's background piece to start? Oh, I don't have last week's. Oh, let me answer that while we're here, but I have to open up the pattern. Hold on a second. Give me a second, y'all, and I will find it. I don't have that pattern with me right next to me. Hold on a second. Clue 1. And I don't want to tell you the wrong thing. Okay, I think it depends on which method of construction you're using, right? I believe, and you could go back to video 1 and rewatch it, right? Because I might tell you wrong, and I'm just looking at the sheet. I believe it was 3 1/4 by 3 1/4. If you're cutting with a rotary cutter, I could be wrong. What I would do, Kim, is go back to the first video. If you're going to do paper piecing, cut it much bigger. I think you'll have an easier time. Debbie said, why are the 2 squares both different sizes last week and this week? Debbie, we're skipping around in this quilt. So, and I'm not going to tell you where this clue goes in the quilt, but each week we will be working with different size pieces. You might be sewing this to something else to make it bigger, right? And we'll find out down the road. But so each clue will be different sizes as we go along. Sheila, you can do this. Lila, you can use dryer sheets. Absolutely. Though well, if you use dryer sheets, you have them on hand, right? Instead of throwing them away, you can use those. They work great. Peggy, we are still packing. Still packing. I know, Heather. We just found the right house at the right time. Hazel said, when you make up your mind, you move on it. We do. I'll tell you, it's been like lightning around here. Yes, Heather, it is the house that I was talking about last week. We found out actually after the live last week that they accepted our contract. So, that's exciting. Okay, I think that's everything for today. I sure do have a lot of sewing to do, right? I've only got 5 done. Tonight, I am going to host another Zoom. That was really fun last Friday night. I don't know if you came, if you were there. I'm going to tell you, it was the most visited Zoom I've ever hosted in my lifetime of hosting Zooms. I think we had over 40-some people there. So, it was really great to see everybody, but it was like 2 pages of, people. You had to toggle back and forth to see everybody. With that many people, sometimes it can get a little bit like, oh, it's a lot of people. So if you want to join us, the only thing I ask is that we stay on topic for this particular Zoom. All about, and we can go back for clue 1 and clue 2. So if you have questions about either one of these 2 clues or the mystery quilt in general, feel free to join us, right? We're going to try to stay on topic to the mystery quilt, right? And yeah, I mean, I'm not going to give away future clue information. But if you have questions about what we've done or just in general about this quilt, I would love for you to come join us. I think last week there was some confusion about where to go to join the Zoom. And I think people thought they were going to be sent a link to join. But to join, all you have to do is go to the Creative Crew Facebook group, and I'm going to post a link on that page. You might have to scroll through to find it, but I also pin it to the featured section, so it should be pretty easy to find. Mary said, that's what you get for being famous. I don't know so much about famous, Mary. But I will say I'm much more popular now than I was in high school. I have way more friends than I do now than I did in high school. Can you take, you know what I can do, Heather? I have to get up and do it. I'm glad I wore jeans today. All right, so she wants to see the 2 clues side by side. So let me go grab them. Hold on a second. I'm just kind of bagging up all my stuff as we go along here. So I do have all of my clue number 1 pieces done. And don't judge me because I didn't really square them up. Let me pick out a pretty one. I didn't square mine up nice and exactly perfect, but they're done. So there we go. Here's clue number 1, right? And that finished at 4.5 by 4.5, right? Yes. And this week's clue is 3.5 by 3.5. They will not go side by side in this quilt. Carolyn said, do we have to be on camera to join the Zoom? No, ma'am. Nope. My hope is that you feel comfortable enough that if you want to turn on your camera, you can, but you don't have to. And we would still love it if you're there. Sometimes it's just fun to join in, right? And to listen to the questions and the conversation. And you do not have to turn on your camera. Oh, Heather said, no, not the 2 clues. The 4 squares you made today. Oh, yes. Duh. Yeah. All right, so I'll tell you which one. This is raw edge applique with heat and bond. This is raw edge applique with freezer paper and glue. This was turned edge applique using starch. And this was turned edge applique using the interfacing. This one stands off of the background more than this one. This one is flatter because we do have that extra layer of Fusible, right, with this one. So it does give it a little bit more texture, a little bit more dimension. It stands off of the background just a little bit more, but there are the 4 blocks that we did today. Sharon, we're going to do the Zoom at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we're going to stay on for about an hour tonight. I have to get up super early in the morning. So I think we're going to stay on for about an hour, right? And I think last week we went over that a little bit, but we also just started chit-chatting here and there a little bit too. But we'll keep it at about an hour, starting at 8:30 Eastern Standard Time. Keep that in mind because a lot of us are in different time zones. And so some people came on to join and we were already done. And that was sad. Thank you, Jackie. Ooh, you got the same fabrics I did, but you haven't gotten them yet. I love these fabrics. I really do. I'm trying to think of a complaint so far because I like giving really honest reviews. I don't know that I have any complaints. The only thing, like if you watched the very first video, I think I mentioned that one of the fabrics was slightly different on screen than the other, and I think it was this one. But in person, this one's really pretty too. I thought it was going to be a little bit darker in person than what it actually was. But, I mean, working with these fabrics is really nice. I like them. They tend to fray a little bit, right? These are the pieces that I've been working with today, and you can see that they're starting to fray a little bit. And I did starch them before I cut out my pieces today. I don't know if I mentioned that or not. But, I mean, the fraying, most fabrics fray a little bit, right? When you're working with them. But yeah, I think you're going to love them. Donna said, what is your favorite method overall? From the 4 we did today, I'll tell you my two favorite, right? The turned edge applique using the starch. That gives me such pretty, beautiful applique, but it takes a considerable amount of time. Raw edge applique, hands down with the heat and bond, because it does add a little extra prevention of this piece fraying, and because I can put heat and bond on my fabric and send it to the Scan and Cut, and the Scan and Cut cuts all my pieces very quickly and very perfectly. So this is the method for me, hands down. And you know, if you go through and you're just scrolling through the videos on my channel, when I do applique, it's almost always with heat and bond, light, raw edge applique. Da, da, da. Did you fuse the whole page of heat and bond to a large square of fabric, or do them one by one? Dawn, for my for sending it to the Scan and Cut, and I don't know if you were here at the very beginning, but if you weren't, come back on the replay and check that out. So what I did, because I cut all of these out with my Scan and Cut really quickly, I cut 2 sheets of fabric, 12 inches by 12 inches, and 2 pieces of heat and bond, 12 inches by 12 inches, right, and fused those. And then I sent it to my cutting machine. I had 15 on a sheet. You might be able to fit more if you lay them out differently. So I cut 30 out, and then I needed 2 more, so I just used one little scrap and just arranged 2 on my mat. I have an older Scan and Cut. I have the CM350, which is discontinued now, but she works like she's brand new. She's like a champ. And so while I've been tempted to get the latest and greatest, I may even still do it, y'all. We have the Mid-Atlantic Quilt Festival coming up, and I forget what booth it is. Is it Tidewater Sewing Back? One of them is a brother dealer and has the machines on display, and you can play with them. She almost talked me into it last year, but I was like, no, I'm going to save my money. But see, this year we're buying a house and I'm saving money, so I probably won't. But one of these times I am going to just splurge on myself and get the newest, greatest Scan and Cut machine. However, I will not be getting rid of my CM350. She's on the louder side. I don't care. It's just me in here. She works perfectly. And I'm going to keep that, even if I get a new one. So Donna, this time when I cut out my pieces with my Scan and Cut mat, I left the paper on the heat and bond, right? And I put it square, right, centered on my mat. And I always add a little bit of packing tape at the top and the bottom just to secure it in place, right? So I had here's the layers, my mat, the heat and bond paper, and then the right side of the fabric facing up, right? And then, I don't know if I still have it. Hold on a second. Yeah, let me show you. Where is it? Where is it? Hold on a second. Hold on a second. It's going to be worth it if I can find it. Here we go. I found it. I'm coming back. All right, so this is the sheet that I cut it from. It was in my big trash can. So, I mean, you do have a little bit of waste with this, right? I feel like quilting, embroidery, all of that stuff, trying to avoid waste is so difficult. So I did have a little bit of waste here, right? But I got 15 out of this 12 inch by 12 inch, right? And so that is what the fabric looked like once I pulled it off. So there we go. Okay, y'all. I'm trying to think. Today I'm long arm quilting a t-shirt quilt this afternoon. Yesterday I think I quilted probably one of the largest quilts I've quilted in like 2 years for a client yesterday. That quilt is gorgeous. I'm going to share pictures on my business page this afternoon if you want to check out her quilt. It is so pretty. It's gorgeous. Gloria, the heat and bond side was down on the mat. The pretty side of the fabric, the right side of the fabric, was facing up. Oh, Celeste said you could save the scraps for like a stained glass quilt. Yeah, you could do that. I mean, if you are super thrifty, I consider myself to be pretty thrifty, y'all. But if you are even more thrifty than I am, you could absolutely use that and not throw that away. You could do something fun with it. I think I'm pretty thrifty. But yes, you don't have to throw that away. So yeah, I am quilting. I have 4 quilts to quilt before Tuesday. And yeah, if you are on Patreon, we have our quilt retreat tomorrow. So I hope you come stop by and say hello. Hang out with us the whole time or just for a few minutes, whatever time you have. It's in the afternoon. That link will be posted on the Patreon page. I know what I'm doing tomorrow during the quilt retreat. I'm sewing these. There's still quite a bit to sew, right? But I hope you're having fun with this. Like, I hope this doesn't turn into something like, oh, I've got to sew the clue for this week. I hope that these clues for you each week are something like, this is your getaway from everything else you have going on, right? This should be your fun time. And if this isn't fun for you, take a break, right? If you at any point think, oh, I've got to finish sewing this clue, take a break from it. It's supposed to be fun. All right, everybody. I hope y'all have a fantastic weekend. I look forward to clue number 3. I'll just give you a little hint. I believe next week we're going to be working on one of the elements for the center of this quilt. So I'm super excited. I hope you join me. As always, if you have questions, reach out to me. You can comment here. I'm not that fast in getting to the questions here on YouTube. Can I just say that when my channel was smaller, it was much easier to keep up with all the comments and questions here on YouTube. But as the channel has grown, there's certain times when I'm more busy and it's just harder to come answer the questions, but I do try to get to those. But you can always come to Creative Crew on Facebook. There's lots of help there. That's one of the reasons I made that group, because everybody's so helpful and they love sharing information, and you get lots of help there. Okay? I love you guys. I hope you have a fantastic week. And we'll see you really soon for clue number 3. Stay warm, everybody. A lot of y'all are getting snow. We've not had like nothing but a couple of flurries here. All right, everybody. Bye.